What can we do if we're a woman over 50 and even 60 on up, and we want to take the advice of lifting heavier in order to get stronger, have more power, more muscle, and age better? But yet we run into some problems. Maybe we've had past surgeries, joint issues, injuries, back problems, things that prevent us from lifting heavy. So we're not arguing with the notion that we do need to do resistance training as women as early as possible, hopefully earlier than 40, your 20s and 30s. But yet we are really struggling with how we can implement this advice. This is the position I have found myself in, somebody who has really over a decade of experience with strength training, with training other women in that modality. I'm a firm believer in resistance training, a firm believer in using weights, bands, body weight, whatever you can to build that muscle. But yet, here I am within the last year, I've had two major orthopedic surgeries. So last summer, I had a back surgery. I had a disc fusion at the L3, L4 to correct a long time problem that I had had for 9 years with off and on debilitating pain. The surgery was successful. I feel I am pretty much healed from that, although total healing, you're usually looking at a year, and I'm not quite a year as I record this. Then, just recently, I had to have surgery to repair a torn rotator cuff. Unfortunately, the tear was all the way through the rotator cuff. It was a full and complete tear. In addition, I had to have bicep tendon surgery because it had come disattached and had to be reattached, tightened, so to speak, for lack of better words. So really, when you're looking at it, three major procedures within the year, if you count the bicep tendon. So right now, I cannot use my left arm. That is where I had the surgery done. And I can only do the exercises that have been prescribed for me in PT. So right now, I'm working on regaining mobility. And then I will be slowly working in some strength with the help of the PT individual that I'm using, the therapist. So here I am. I certainly cannot lift up a heavy barbell, and I don't know when in my future I will be able to, or if I really want to go heavy, heavy in the future. Because now, having been through two surgeries, I'm 63. The time that I lose, that I could be exercising, I could be building muscle, it's lost. And all of the recovery, all of the emotional pain that goes with this, not just the physical pain, but the emotional pain. I haven't been able to drive for almost 6 weeks now. Hopefully, I'll be driving next week. So I've had to be dependent on my kids and my husband to drive me around. I've had to have my husband's help in and out of clothing and in various situations where I cannot use my arm. Very frustrating. But yet, I do believe in the need for women to strength train. This is a subject that I feel has been largely ignored, especially right now. There is a tendency within the field for women in general, and specifically in midlife, menopause, and beyond, for there to be blanket advice given. So for a long time, we were hearing fasting and low carb across the board for all women. Now we know that that's not the best approach for every woman, and it depends case. And we have to be careful with fasting. We don't want to lose muscle, and we want to have an adequate feeding window to get that protein in, that protein that we need for muscle synthesis and to retain our muscle. So we know that that blanket advice, it might apply in certain situations to women who are metabolically inflexible. Perhaps they're pre-diabetic, a lot of weight to lose, they're sedentary. This might be better advice. But if you are lifting, you're hiking, you're playing tennis, you're very active, you're going to need some carbohydrates in your diet. Healthy carbohydrates, but you're going to need them. Then we see blanket advice that was given to women for years to dance around with the pink dumbbells. I remember back in the day, the videos that I would watch, and we would put on little ankle weights and do exercises in front of the videos, and the Jane Fonda days. And really, the weights were light. It was very high rep. It was all about the burn. And now we know that that is not the most effective way. Now we're getting advice in the space, and I'm seeing this a lot. You might not see it as much. It depends on who you follow and who's on your Instagram, whether or not you're on Instagram. But if you're on Instagram, you're following fitness and nutrition women, and you're specifically interested in menopause, you're going to see the advice to lift heavy. And it's advice coming from very reputable sources. One in particular that I'm thinking of, I won't mention names, but she really has the research knowledge. She really understands female physiology. So I'm not arguing with the fact that heavy lifting can be beneficial for women. And I did it myself for many, many years, very heavy when I first started bodybuilding. But the question we come back to time and time again is the what if. There's what the research says, there's what the science says, and then there's real life. And I'm going to argue that they don't always line up perfectly. There's what is going on in the lab, and then there's that real woman with real problems. And these two things don't always coincide. So while the research may be accurate, I think we need to dive a little bit deeper. Is there a way to build muscle and strength and power without the higher impact, without the heavier load on our joints? So for instance, now with my back, my problem at the L3, L4 was remedied, but I have disc problems that start at L2 and go all the way down to the S1 joint. And the problems at the L4, L5, those are not resolved. They weren't resolved by surgery. They're still there. And I still have to be cognizant of that. Now, you'll hear advice like, oh, your back pain is because you don't have glute strength or you don't have core strength. Well, I'm here to tell you I've had both and had it for a long time. Solid core strength, solid glute strength. You might hear that it's a form issue. My form has been spot on for quite some time. I learned to lift from someone who was very experienced, who had a watchful eye on me and taught me correct ways to lift many, many years ago. So this advice, like I said, is just not always applicable for us as women and men too, if we have significant joint back issues, pain issues. We have to work around that. So every time I try to do a deadlift, doesn't matter how light the deadlift, I have back pain afterward. It doesn't matter how good my form is. It doesn't matter how tight my core is. That forward motion is too much repeatedly when it's loaded on the L4, L5 discs in my back. It just puts too much strain. And I suffer for it. And the way it manifests is burning pain down the left leg. And I'm actually going to silence my notifications right now, because I just heard one come across and I thought they were silent. There we go. We don't want my phone dinging off in the middle of this. So what I'm going to cover today is how you can work around these issues. And once again, I am not arguing with the experts with this. I'm not arguing with the research. I'm just saying it's not always accessible to everyone. And you're leaving behind a large part of the population, the demographic of women 50 plus, when you insist that that is absolutely mandatory for getting around the loss of estrogen that we experience as women. So let's look at what's happening. So estrogen is responsible for muscle protein synthesis and strength and power. Pretty big things that estrogen is responsible for. Progesterone and estrogen together are responsible for bone density and bone growth. Once again, very important. So what do you think happens? We go through perimenopause. We start to have a decline in these hormones. We go through menopause, they tank. we have to look at other ways to get that stimulus to the muscle. Now, yes, there's a bioidentical hormone replacement therapy. I've used it for years. I do believe it is helpful in many respects. But this is the thing with hormone therapy. It is never the same as what was produced in, say, our 20s and early 30s. It's never going to match up to that. And I have found it to be more helpful with symptoms such as the night sweats, the brain fog. Another one is the hot flashes. I was really having problems with those. And when I went on hormone replacement therapy, it helped all three of those. And sleep was helped by progesterone. And to this day, I still use those bioidentical hormones. Bioidentical meaning it's as close to nature as possible. But once again, the way it is delivered, the way it is in the body is really not ever going to match up perfectly to what we had in our youth. So it's a tool. It is something to help us in those menopausal years. But once again, we find blanket advice. It may not be appropriate for every woman. So we have to look at this on a bio individual basis. And the only way you can do that is you've got to cut out the noise, do your own research, solid research, talk to a practitioner who's actually hormone literate, not one of these clinics on the street where you just walk in and get what you want and get pellets or whatever. You want to really go with somebody reputable who can walk you through this and perhaps start you with some low doses. But now we're back to the issue of losing strength and power. And how can we address this? So, once again, the argument is that we need an external stress, and the main external stressor is going to be exercise. And it's going to be exercise in the form of higher intensity training and heavier load lifting. What it does is it actually changes the insulin sensitivity. It changes blood sugar and how it's regulated within the body. So if you're doing high intensity sprints, the brain perceives this stress, and in response within the skeletal muscle, it will store more glucose, more blood sugar, and the mitochondria will actually change and use more fatty acids. So more might be mispronouncing this, but myokine is released to the muscle, and those are peptides that are produced and expressed and released within the muscle fibers. They're important because they help with, once again, glucose metabolism, that blood sugar regulation, inflammation. We know that we can have a problem with inflammation after menopause, muscle growth and function, brain function or cognition, and adipose tissue, body fat. So, and also bone formation and cell function as well. So, when we look at all of these things, yes, look at this how high intensity training, how heavier loads of lifting can really help us post menopause. Not arguing with this at all. There was a recent article and it reached the menopausal community, spread out, and it's really been buzzing with this article ever since, called the musculoskeletal syndrome of menopause. And I'm probably mispronouncing that too. It wouldn't come out of my mouth right. It's like I see it in my head, I hear it in my head, and then when I go to say the words, they don't always come out the way I want. So, this was actually the first piece of research that's using these terms, that's really bringing attention to what can come from this decrease in estrogen in perimenopause and menopause and post. It really shows us what can go wrong when we lose muscle and the fatigue, which is so debilitating to women. So debilitating. And especially as we get older and we move into those later years, falls become more of an issue, breaking bones become more of an issue. We want to be strong. We want strong bones. And so this loss of estrogen is problematic. And this article brought attention to it, which is good. We need to have attention. But there's a part of the article that refers to exercise, in particular, heavier lifting being far superior, heavier lifts with shorter reps, say 6 reps, as opposed to 12 to 15. And it's superior for this age group, according to this article. It's superior over the lighter lifting, higher rep. Problem is, the article used information, and the information they cited, it was actually a review article, not a systematic study. So that's important, or an actual study where they were looking at real people. And what they did was they pulled bits and pieces of research and put it all together in this article and made recommendations. So that's an issue there because it's really pulled from various sources and is not taking into consideration other things. So let's look at what's happening as we age, and this happens with both men and women. We tend to keep a good amount of our type 1 muscle fibers. And these are smaller fibers, they're endurance fibers. Think about a bar class, going out on a long walk, hiking, a long jog, a long steady state run. It's more of that steady state. Your heart rate's not going up and down. You're not lifting heavy loads. You're not taking sprints. You're just kind of keeping things steady. And women tend to do better in this department. We're better with endurance. So this tells us that we shouldn't just train endurance because we already have some strength there. We need to tap into the power and getting stronger as we age. So those muscle fibers are important. It's not that they're not important, but the ones that we really want to focus on are the type 2 muscle fibers, because those are the type that are involved with strength and lifting and power, and they decline as we age, like a lot of other things. And this is especially true for women with that loss of estrogen. This is going to decline. So we want to talk about how can we engage these type 2 muscle fibers, and how can we keep strong and build muscle and stimulate the muscle fibers. So we not only lose these muscle fibers as estrogen declines, we also use our ability to contract those type 2 muscle fibers. So estrogen receptors are the primary driver for how that muscle contracts. And with decreasing estrogen comes that decrease in our ability to contract those type 2, recruit those type 2 muscle fibers that we need. Now the question becomes, is heavy lifting the only way? Is high intensity sprints and jumps the only way? Because that's another thing I can no longer do. Tried, not after the surgery, but I tried, it's probably a couple of years back, and I just wanted to try a few sprints. And I thought, okay, I'll get on the treadmill, I'll control the speed. Two problems arose. Number one, the speed that I needed would cause that burning sensation down my leg. So that was the number one issue, pain. And the number two issue was it would stop me from going to the high intensity I needed. So I really would never make it to that higher intensity because I was stopped by the pain. Then I would pay for it for 2 or 3 days afterwards, and maybe even miss a gym day because of one 20-minute sprinting session. It was the same as the heavy deadlifts, same as the light deadlifts. I just could not safely do them. So what else can I do? And the good news is there are things that we can do. So higher rep, all the way up to 30 reps, and this is research-based, has been shown to stimulate the muscle. You can gain strength and you can increase muscle size. Now, if you pop out 30 and you feel like you can pop out another 30 because you've got 1-pound dumbbells, no, that's not going to work. We're right back to those old days of dancing around in front of the TV set, doing 100,000 reps for, one leg to stimulate the muscle and going for the burn. That's not effective. And the burn in and of itself is not effective. As women, we want that burn. We think that means, oh boy, we're really doing something. We're stimulating the muscle. We're burning calories. We're getting results on those glutes because of how much it burns. But once again, research has showed that that is not necessarily a factor to muscle growth, and it can even hinder it. Because what happens when we burn, and you see this with leg extensions, they'll really burn down the front of the quad, the thigh, is that you want to stop. And when you stop short of reaching that muscle stimulation. So you really want to take the muscles to the point where they're starting to fail, they're fatiguing, they're starting to give out. This can be done with 6 reps and heavy weight, or it could be done with 20 reps and lighter weight if you are intentional and training correctly. It really does require, I think, more intent and thought than using the heavy weights. Now, once again, I'm not going to argue. I look back on pictures when I lifted heavier, and I do see more muscle development in the glutes and legs. But I had to let a lot of that go because of my back. And now with the shoulder injury, I never want to go through this type of surgery again. It was extremely disruptive, in some ways, more disruptive than the back surgery. So when I go back to my training, I'm more than likely going to be using a moderate weight where I get 15 reps and maybe up to 20, and using that to stimulate the muscle. I'm not going to do the 6 because the problem I run into with the 6, and I've already run into it with the legs, if I do 6 squats, it's nothing because I can't pick up a heavy enough weight on my spine for 6 reps to be hard. So I am left with a higher rep, time under tension. And you may be in the same boat. You may have experienced injuries, or maybe you are worried about some shoulder impingements or some little pains you're having in your lower back, and you're afraid to push to those heavier weights. So when you get the burn, you have a tendency to stop, and you stop short of that muscle recruitment. So I don't want you to go by the burn. I want you to put that idea back out of your head that burning is doing something. So this is the one problem that we do see with higher rep. So this is remedied by picking up a slightly higher weight. So when I'm on the leg press, if I have a 45 on each side on the plate loaded leg press, I can go to 50 without a problem. And it will burn, but I can go to 50 without a problem. So I need to add, say, an additional 20 on there, which sounds like a lot, but on a plate loaded leg press, it's actually not as much as you think because you can really push quite a bit of weight. And it's just enough that it doesn't bother my back, but I can go to the 20 or 30 and feel like I'm reaching more muscle fatigue. So the way you should feel is those last few reps, say the last, I'm going to say 5, you are really saying to yourself, I would rather be done with this. I'm starting, my muscles are shaking. I'm getting to fatigue, and I would rather be done with this. If you're not getting that feeling, you're going to need to use different techniques or a little heavier weight. Doesn't mean you grab the heaviest weight, but a little heavier weight to get that response. Sometimes slowing down the motion can do a lot. Sometimes as women, we have a tendency to just pump it out fast as we can go. I'm that girl. I have really good kind of quick twitch muscle fiber recruitment, or I used to when I was younger. So my body just naturally gravitates to this boom, 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 and slow it down. Slow down the reps, isometric holds, squeeze, engage the muscles. And you might not need to go heavier by just recruiting that into your training. Now, there is a study that showed that there was more strength. We're not talking development of the muscle, we're talking strength of the muscles in the heavier load training. However, this is the deal. When somebody is doing that type of training, they're typically going by their 1 rep max. 1 rep max meaning the heaviest weight they can do for 1 rep. I cannot even do a 1 rep test. Maybe at one point on my upper body I could, but not on my lower body, because I would be lifting so heavy, I would injure my spine. I would cause problems with my spine and pay for it later. So if you've got people, that's the way they train over and over and over again for that one, they're training according to the 1 rep max, and they're basing the weight they pick up. They're basing that 6 reps they're going to do on that 1 rep max. Naturally, they're going to do really well. They're going to perform well in a research study when asked to do it and appear to be stronger because they have practiced that skill. Someone like me will not have that skill. I'm not doing that. So we have to look at the design of the study. How is it structured together? We can't just look at the data that comes out the other end. How did they get the data? So again, there's a little bit of a bias there because these individuals have trained in this manner and they're very good at that strength, at that 1 rep max, whereas somebody who's done lower weight and higher reps has not used that skill. So we want to look at fiber recruitment. And back in the day, they would use these probes. They were called, I believe, EMG probes to see how much the type 2 fibers were recruited. And of course, they found they weren't recruiting as much with the lighter load as they were with a heavier load. But now they're beginning to look at the glycogen stores in the muscle. Are we depleting the glycogen stores in the muscle? And they're finding that that can be done with higher rep. It can be done with lower weight, lower rep, higher weight. So we're back to the beginning. What can we do? If you are in the same boat as me and your injuries might be different, you might have knee, you might have hip. My husband had a hip replacement. These things happen. And sometimes there's some genetic factors involved. And sometimes in my case, I do believe I trained heavy for many years. I was in bodybuilding. I started out in a division called figure and then moved to bikini. So in bodybuilding, there's the traditional bodybuilder, like what we think about in our head, really bulky. And typically those women are using substances to get to that stage. They're using some type of anabolic to reach that stage. Then you have the physique, which is just a little bit step down from there. And same thing, you're going to see a lot of that use. Then you step down into the figure. And when I started in figure, women were not using substances really for the most part, maybe one here or there. And they certainly weren't using them in my age group. And when I started out, I did really well and would either place or take top. In one competition in San Jose, I took first place, and this was against younger women. I went to nationals and I took top 3. Then in a year, it began to change, and it changed dramatically. And you had women stepping down from the physique or the bodybuilding and doing the divisions below them. And so I began to compete with women that were much larger on substances. Now, is everyone taking this? And is every woman my age doing this in bodybuilding? No, they're not. I did see a lot of natural bodybuilders too, but it's changed over the years and it became more difficult. So in an effort to keep up as a natural athlete, I began to lift heavier and heavier. And I got into trouble with that. It was too much on my lower back. And that was the first thing to really show the wear and tear of those years. Then, of course, this rotator cuff accident happened almost a year ago. It happened 3 weeks before my back surgery. So there was nothing I could do about it because I was already scheduled for back surgery. And I was hoping down deep inside, okay, maybe it's not as bad as I think, even though it really hurt. It hurt the whole time I was healing from back surgery. I went through physical therapy. I did everything to regain that strength and finally had the MRI. And that's when the doctor told me this will get worse. The tear will get bigger. And what you don't want is it to tear repeatedly, that tear to get bigger, and then it's inoperable. Then there's nothing they can do. So I opted to have the surgery. I knew it would be hard, but looking down the road, I'm like, I do not want to be worried about this tearing further. So time will tell if I made the right decision. And of course, I'll be very honest with you about that. And I'm also going to be sharing some of my journey going forward. In particular, probably within my membership that I have for women, which is the Forever Fit Circle. I just rebranded that membership and updated it. made it a little bit different based on feedback that I was receiving. So within that membership, we focus on strength training, we focus on building power, we focus on nutrition, education, and mindset and motivation within there. So I'll be sharing my journey of what I'm doing to come back from shoulder surgery. Right now, I can't because I can't lift anything right now. I can only do the exercises in PT, and that will be the case for quite some time. I'm looking at about a 6-month journey with PT, and I'm about a month out from surgery, almost 6 weeks out, 5.5 weeks, right around in there. So I'll share that with you. But my point with sharing all of this with you is I have a 360-degree view. I'm a woman who went through perimenopause at a time when no one talked about perimenopause. No one talked about it. The words were not used. I think I heard it once, and then I read it somewhere in a magazine, and then it was debunked, saying there's no such thing, which of course we now know that is not true. There is. I went through menopause. I was embarrassed. I did not share the journey. I did not talk to anyone. I felt very alone. I thought I was the only one in the world feeling the way that I felt. And that's why I embarked on learning more about hormones, learning more about the effect on women's bodies so that women in the future don't have to go through that. Now there's tons of talk. There's tons of openness about it, and that's great. But the downside is this blanket advice that I see that we just cannot do that. We can't say there's one way, or this is the only way, or this is the absolute best way. There's the research, there's the studies, and there's real life, what's really happening with women, what women are really going through. And you know what? In my early 50s, when I first found strength training and I first started to compete at age 51, I felt invincible. I would do cardio with box jumps. I did the high intensity. I jump roped. Like I said, the box jump. I did the sprints. And then I also did the heavy lifting. That was what I was primarily doing with very little endurance cardio in there. It was mostly interspersed with high intensity intervals, small amount of that, lots of heavy lifting. And then I hit that back injury. I hit that wall. And I've never, ever been able to go back to what I did before. And I won't. It's not a possibility for me. So I have this 360-degree view of somebody who's been through the hormonal changes and then somebody who's been through the injuries. They've been through real life. They've been through the battles. When I was 54, I was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis, which is not really arthritis as we think of. It is an autoimmune disease. And I have it pretty much in remission, symptoms pretty much under control. But again, it damaged my joints. It affected my joints. I broke a metatarsal at one point in my foot. And come to find out, the rheumatoid arthritis had done significant damage to both feet by the time it was diagnosed. These are real life things. And so when I see women say, lift heavy, all women need to lift heavy. Be careful giving that advice to someone because it might not be the advice that is best for them. So I hope you found this helpful. It's a solo episode today, obviously. It took a little bit of a break. I actually did have a guest scheduled and my calendar didn't sync correctly. So I had one time in my calendar and she had another time in hers, and she showed up, I wasn't there, and then I showed up and she wasn't there. So I thought, you know what? I set aside the time. I'm going to record this episode. It's been on my heart. It's been on my mind. And I think that you can benefit from this. I think that even if you're a woman that's not experiencing this, you don't know what the future holds. Maybe you're able to do those things in the present, but maybe you're going to be challenged in a way you haven't thought of in the future. And it's going to require you to pivot. At 63, I've had to pivot more than once in my life. So let me know your thoughts. You can always reach out to me on Instagram is where I hang out the most, at Carol Covino Fitness. I'm on Facebook. And then you can go to my website, carolcovino.com, to learn more about my membership, and how you can join and follow me on my journey. And until next time, I wish you every blessing. I mean that with all of my heart. Bye for now.